Yeah. Well, I guess we can take just a step back, and if you could just provide a little bit of background into who you are, where you're from, and what initially brought you to ASL.
Yeah, sure. All right, so obviously my name is Jack Phillips. I was born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona, in the U.S. And after graduating, I started teaching immediately. So that was, I think, ultimately what led me to this point is I got into schools and kind of never stopped. And I was a high school teacher, math and physics. I have a passion and some training in music, and so I was teaching music history, music theory. And then I moved back to Phoenix, where I established my family. I got married, had children, and that's also where I made the transition from classroom teacher to administrator. I'd worked in a middle school and then a high school, and at that point, I think it was 2013, I found my way here at ASL to be the high school principal, so 10 years ago exactly. We left in 2018 to go back to the U.S., primarily so that my wife could go to law school. She and we as a family had made many sacrifices for my career, including coming to London, and it was her turn. And so, and she is passionate about criminal justice reform in the U.S., and decided that the best way to express that and to find meaning in work was to become a lawyer. So she did that. We moved back to Philadelphia in the U.S., or just outside of Philadelphia, where she attended Temple Law School, graduated, passed the bar, and now works for the Public Defender's Office or Association in Philadelphia. While she was doing that, we made the decision. Well, one, I think it was I had had a pretty intensive run as a school leader, both at ASL and before that, and based on the nature of her ability to go to law school and be a full-time student, I needed to take a job that allowed me to be the primary parent. And so to do that, I didn't work in a school for the first time in my adult life, and instead worked at a nonprofit that supported schools within the Philadelphia area, and then ultimately working in consulting, and ended up at a technology company where I was working for school districts, so large numbers of schools, state schools within the U.S., for 4 years. And that's what I did. And ultimately the goal was to come back into schools at some point. But when found out about the ASL opening for an interim position, we talked about it as a family and ultimately decided this was a great opportunity for me professionally, because I could get back into a school, which will make me a better candidate when I look for my next job, but also an incredible chance for my family, for my kids who went to ASL before, but didn't remember a whole lot, and for them to have experienced London and experience ASL, which were such formative parts of their lives, and to experience it in a totally new way. And this is a one-year position, so I'll only be here throughout the school year until they find a permanent, they'll find a permanent one for the next school year, a permanent principal. So I'm kind of just holding down the fort till then. Okay. Yeah. So that's where.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but in 2013 to 2014, you also came as the interim high school principal.
Did your homework? Yeah, that's right. Yes, that's right. But that was a pretty different circumstance. I mean, it's very similar. Yeah. And that I believe the reason the decision was an interim was because of kind of starting the search process pretty late in the international search cycle. It's a pretty intensive cycle, and you have to start early if you're going to try and cast a wide net, a worldwide net, which ASL likes to do. But yeah, I came in as interim. But there, what was different was that I was all in and was intent on becoming the permanent principal at the time. But yeah, you're right. I was hired as an interim.
Yeah, that was my follow-up question to that, because I was going to draw from an interview that you gave to the Standard.
Look at you. I'm very impressed right now.
Yeah, no, there was an interview
Also very nervous.
you gave to the Standard back in 2013 when it was announced you were going to be an interim high school principal. And my question would have been whether or not you would attack this sort of situation you're in the same way as indicated in this quote
Yeah, please read the quote.
It's partially a paraphrase, but
Probably
you
won't
said
remember it anyway.
to do anything but treat the interim position as if you plan to work at ASL indefinitely. To do anything less than that would be a disservice to ASL, and that you were playing for keeps.
Wow. All right.
I
Those
assume
my
you
words,
don't.
playing for
Those
keeps?
those
That's
those
funny.
those were your words.
I believe it.
In that sort of regard, I guess, how do you plan to sort of approach this
Yeah.
this school year?
Yeah, I think it's funny, right? You change and grow over time as a person, as an employee, as a school leader. I think a difference. I mean, I stand by that statement. I think at the time, especially given my own personal goals of becoming the permanent, like I was all in and wasn't playing, but it would have been a disservice to do anything else other. And my remit this time is a little different because I was hired with the understanding that I would only be here for a year. So it's not a matter of like being all in for me. But I do agree with the idea that I am not here just to tread water. I am not here as a placeholder. I am here as a steward and ultimately to be accountable for the success of the high school this year and to help ensure as smooth a transition for next year as possible. And to that extent, absolutely, I'm playing for keeps. I mean, I'm putting everything I've got into this. I think the goals may look a little different, where I can think a little longer term when I was going in and becoming the permanent principal, whereas now I have to really think about what is reasonable for a one-year set of goals versus longer term goals.
So another piece of actually the same interview talked about the role of disciplinarian that comes with the position. Interestingly, actually, the same topic came up in my interview for this show last year with Mr. Perry.
Oh, okay.
He naturally didn't particularly appreciate that it was part of his job description, but obviously it's necessary. I don't believe anyone loves that it's part of their job description.
No.
But again, it's part of your job description too. How do you sort of process or deal and approach that part of your job?
Yeah, it's a great question. You're right. I've yet to meet somebody who loves being in schools, loves working with students, loves being around sort of the learning of both students and adults, and loves the disciplinary aspect of the job. I think the way I approach that is as a necessary part of the job, but only in as much, and I think I said this, I don't know if you were in the behavior expectation assemblies last week, but the way I look at it is around my role in helping to ensure that this is an environment in which students can thrive and learn and we can achieve the mission of the school. And so I don't see it as discipline in and of itself. I see it, or in terms of justice, I think that there's a different part of society that deals with that, or punitive measures or anything along those lines. I think of it, how do we ensure that this is a place where everybody can learn and grow safely as a student? And so I think we can look at all of our rules and all the systems that we have in place, and ultimately it's to try and create that kind of environment and to achieve that end. And so that's how I approach it. And I think I use the line, it is tempting, I think, it is when you believe and work with young people that everybody makes mistakes and you want to believe that everyone can recover from those mistakes. And I do deeply believe in that. In my job as principal, my job and responsibility is to the community of the school. And so sometimes those things come in conflict, and that I believe in the person's, our ability to make mistakes and to recover and grow and learn from those mistakes. And sometimes it means, in order for the sake of the community, I need to take pretty serious action to ensure that it remains a safe place where everyone can grow and thrive.
You mentioned earlier in your previous response to the previous question that an important part of where you've come since 2013 involves sort of looking at how you've grown as an educator, as a leader, as a person. Could you sort of delve into a little bit more of that?
It's a great question, and I don't know that Well, okay, I have thought a lot about this. I was at a very different point in my career in that I had been a principal, although I'd been assistant principal before, but I'd been a principal at only one school before, and I guess that's still true. But I've now sort of had that tenure at ASL under my belt. I'm also just in a different place in my life. I'm older now. My children are older. And I think that one thing I wonder is some of the actions and decisions that I made, would I make the same decisions now? Or if I would make the same decisions, would I approach them in the same way that I did now? I think mostly probably due to lack of experience, I jumped into things without fully being aware of the consequences necessarily. And I think sometimes that was called for. That was absolutely the right thing to do because it took maybe a little bit of ignorance in order to have the courage to do some of the things that, when I think back, some of the harder decisions that had to be made. So part of me wonders, like, would I have the courage to do that now? I'd like to think yes, but probably I would approach things potentially differently, and that I am a little bit clearer on what consequences, both at ASL and at schools in general. Yeah. I'd be a little clearer about how, what the implications are, how I need to be thinking about the nuances and the complexities of the job and the institution, and I think that's some way. I think it's mostly has to do with experience of seeing what are the consequences of the decisions and actions and words that I choose. Yeah. I'm probably a little more cautious now.
Yeah. Could you just give me a little bit of insight into what you value as a leader, some like sort of traits, characteristics that you sort of value in the community?
That's a good question. So I think at its core, I think one of the values is the joy. It's going to sound a little cliche, but the joy of learning. I think learning is a deeply human endeavor. It is one of the most incredible things to experience yourself, to see others, to help others achieve. I mean, it's sort of evolution at a extremely accelerated pace, where you can see over the course of an individual's life the ability to discover and wonder and to change and question. I think it's sort of what makes us us, and it's also what makes me me. I love learning. By and large, learning should be a joyous experience. So that's one. The second is that it's a community that's kind of that's founded on decency, kindness, fundamental respect for one another. I don't have a lot of patience for meanness, for pessimism. It's sort of, we are in an optimistic endeavor together. Like, the whole point of learning is sort of future-oriented, and that is something that I try to embody. I understand not everyone is going to come to education that way, but it's something that's very important to me, and I do try to have that influence everything that I do. So I think those are probably the way we treat one another, and that's students to students, it's adults to students, it's adults to adults, but then ultimately how we treat each other in pursuit of this joy of learning are probably two of the most important pillars of my sort of approach to schools. I mean, it's probably worth putting a little asterisk and understanding that a school is not the be-all and end-all in terms of individual development and identity development. Like, students have lives outside of school. We should not be dictating that. We should not be the sole contributor, and we need to recognize where the limitations are in terms of school's influence. But having said that, I think school plays a critical role, both in individual development and then the role that the individual plays more broadly in society and their future communities. So I will start by saying that. But in an individual, I think we have to be really flexible. Those things that I said about sort of joy of learning and kindness and sort of a genuine mutual respect, I would expect to see it at an individual level, but I think it looks really different. And I think we all are sometimes we have better days and worse days, and sometimes we are more engaged or less engaged, and sometimes You may find one subject or one class extraordinarily mind-blowing and sort of world-opening, but other days you may find it tedious and boring. And so I think it's being patient in terms of not expecting a kind of monolithic approach to what that looks like, and understanding that we're all going to express that in different ways. But if someone doesn't experience those things at all, like they either themselves are not treating other people with sort of a mutual dignity and respect, or they themselves are the recipient of it, like we got to lean in as a school environment to the individual to help support that. And then same with learning. I mean, if they are not engaging in learning, they are not finding it, at the end of the day, a joyous enterprise, like we should be thinking about what our role is as the adults in the building to help create that environment.
Mm-hmm. I'll sort of, last couple questions here.
Yeah, sure.
How do you plan to connect with faculty and administration in terms of sort of achieving that solid environment over the next year?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one I've been thinking a lot about. So being really transparent with the faculty about what the goals are. And for example, I've been really clear with them, like, hey, one of the things I want to focus on is how are we building community as a group of adults within the community. I mean, bringing the teachers and staff together to talk about the great things that are happening all the time, to try and minimize sort of that grind, the work that's sort of necessary, but kind of in order to run a school, run an organization is required, but trying to keep that to only ask the kind of bare minimum, so that more of our space is talking about how we're teaching, how students are learning, how are we all thriving. I'm doing it through connecting personally with folks. I try to listen well. I try to connect. I think it's something, my leadership style is very relational. So I try to help lead and move individuals through a personal connection with them. That if people can believe in me because they know I'm connected to them, I'm invested in their individual success, we as an institution or as a group of individuals can move together as well. So those are some of the ways. I'm spending a lot of time with the leadership team at the high school, making sure that they've worked extremely hard over the last several years, and making sure that they feel that it's paid off, and that I'm helping sort of provide a way forward as best as possible. And then I think one of the most important things I would do this year is make sure that the next principal is set up for success. Yeah. And I think that's important for faculty, so they don't feel like everyone feels like they're starting over again next year. Give space for this new principal to be their own authentic self and to lead the way that they need to lead. However, also making sure that it doesn't feel like everything's on hold for another year while the principal is getting to know the whole place. And I think making sure that everyone, I know what the issues are, I know what people are thinking about, and how can I adequately convey that to the next principal so they're set up for success.